Hello and welcome to this special edition of Dr. K's Psychobabble. We're a week away from we're a week away from Thanksgiving, one of our favorite holidays here in the United States. We all gather as much as we can with our COVID-19 thing going on. But I thought it'd be a really good time to maybe talk about eating. And the title of this, Satiation, is the experience of being full and satisfied. We get the same root from satisfaction, satiated, that I'm at the end of my meal and I feel good. Now, what commonly comes up is that when we have these big special meals, at the end of the meal we don't necessarily feel good. We might feel that we've eaten too much. So I thought that I would examine some of the brain processes and neurobiology of what is going on this favorite of holidays so that we can understand how we get hungry, how we satisfy that hunger, and the important role that dessert might play. And then we'll answer that peculiar question as to why you get so tired at the end of the meal. So let's take a look at the brain. So here's the brain, and the part of the brain that we're going to be looking at is this part in the middle part of the brain called the hypothalamus. Now the hypothalamus is implicated in a lot of our drives and needs. So sex drive and hunger drive and a thirst and whatnot, all of those things that drive us, biological needs that drive us, are managed a lot within the hypothalamus. Now, what we're going to do is take a look at the neurochemistry that's happening and what happens during the day as we're getting ready for our Thanksgiving. I'm going to place this right in the Thanksgiving context here. So let's take a look at the complex neurobiology here. And doesn't this look like you just want to print this out and hand it out at Thanksgiving? It's just really just a great graphic. So here we are, and on the left-hand side we have various stimuli that occur during the day, and then we have the red and green circles represent structures within the hypothalamus, the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus, and one set of the hypothalamus initiates hunger and the drive to attain and satiate that hunger. The other one tells us we've had enough. So those two parts of the hypothalamus are receiving information, sending that off to the brain, and then we react to those feelings that we have. So we're going to start off here over on the left-hand side, and I want you to look at this area right here. Now, during the day, as we are preparing for the meal, it's pretty likely we don't eat a whole lot of other things that day. We're really anticipating the Thanksgiving meal. At the same time, if your family's like mine, that bird is cooking in the oven for hours and hours and filling the house with all kinds of smells, and just the whole social vibe of what's going on is also part of the stimulus that's going into the brain. Here is we have food deprivation that releases ghrelin, and we have taste input that is coming in through our olfactory senses. Our olfactory senses and our taste senses are very, very intricately connected. So these go in and they create a hunger motive. So the actual environment full of smells and the fact that we probably had a small breakfast, we might even, depending on when you have the Thanksgiving meal, might be the next meal, or we're going to kind of go light. We're a little hungry. And we're anticipating this great meal. The smells are all over us. Of course, we're going to be hungry. So what will happen is this part of the hypothalamus releases a number of neurotransmitters over to another part of the hypothalamus the paraventricular nucleus, which then passes on the information to increases our awareness, our mouth is watering, those kinds of things. Now that blue circle went right through some important neurotransmitters, because as the hunger motive is actually on its way, sending its signal to the paraventricular nucleus, it is also releasing some inhibitory neurotransmitters which activate the satiety motive part of the hypothalamus. So even under those circumstances, even though the brain is saying you're hungry, this other neurons are being activated in another part of the hypothalamus that are actually holding you off. Now, how that turns into behavior, I'm not quite sure, but it might be, I might be really hungry, but there's also a motive within me to not eat right now. I'm going to wait for the meal. That anticipatory satisfaction that I'm going to hold off, and then I'm going to finally partake in the meal. So back to our graphic here, as soon as we start eating, we get the distension of the stomach, which we'll talk about again later, but the distension of the stomach as we are eating and food is going into our stomach releases CCK, which is a short-term satiety signal. So that signal goes over to this particular aspect of the hypothalamus, and it relates melanocortin over to the paraventricular nucleus, and as our stomach gets more and more full, we're more and more satisfied. Now, keep in mind that those smells and tastes and the unique combination of flavors that we associate with Thanksgiving dinner are still sending signals to make us hungry. So we're in this battle of I'm hungry and I want more food, but my stomach is getting full. And for the most part, for many of us at least, the hunger signals overwhelm us. I'm just going to have one more helping, and boy, look at that stuffing, and we just keep on eating. Now, if we stop eating, one of the advice that you might get from your doctor is just hold up, have your first serving, and then stop. And the reason why we would want to do that is to allow the slower processing mechanisms of satiety to take effect. So if we're going to look at this from this model, we would be activating, sorry, I pressed the back button on that. We'd be activating these aspects as we are processing. We've taken a pause, we start processing, we start storing our food into body fat and insulin. And so our pancreas responds to this and says, we got plenty of sugar, we got plenty of energy here. It starts to send signals over to the satiety motive. You can see that this area, the amount of body fat that we have, which releases leptin, and the amount of insulin within our bloodstream, can activate either the hunger motive or the satiety motive. That's the homeostasis part, but that takes longer. So as we're eating, we may decide our stomach is distending, saying you're hungry, but all that food is right in front of us, looking really good. And we might say, okay, I'm going to stop with one serving, and I'm just going to not eat for a while. And then as that homeostasis process kicks in, it will start to overwhelm the hunger motive, and we might not eat that second serving. We'll have more for leftovers. That's what I'm thinking. Now, what that does, that sends signals over to here. Again, we're looking at a system that says, I've got enough, my blood sugar's fine, let's go. I want to take a moment, however, to speculate about something, and that is the role of dessert. Now, me and my family, in my preparation for this video, have been talking about this, and I've wondered, where did dessert come from? Why do we have that treat at the end? And I looked it up and I couldn't find, I could see it as a tradition. I could see the history of sweets at meals that they were just another course in the meal, and they weren't necessarily at the end of the meal. But I couldn't really find research out there specific to why do we have dessert at the end. So I'm going to speculate something. I'm going to pull this right out of the air. That at one time in this world, people would have meals, and individuals didn't necessarily have a lot of food. Let's say in the early Americas, people didn't have a lot of food. So they would get to a point in the meal, there really wasn't a second serving. And that activation of the hunger is still there. People are still there at the end of the meal, but they're still hungry. So how do you deal with that? Now, again, speculating, what if we had a treat at the end? Berries at this time, berries are what evolved into the elaborate desserts that we have, but certainly food that has high sugar content, high glucose. Now let's look at this from the perspective of our brain chemistry. What I'm talking about is this. Glucose, which is an immediate injection of high sugar content into our bloodstream, activates satiety. So imagine if we invented desserts at the end of the meal in order to put a stop date on being hungry. So we would leave a relatively small meal satisfied. Now, what this does in the modern world is it tells us how we might use dessert as a way to not eat so much. That sounds counterintuitive, but roll with it. So let's say I eat my first round of my first serving of Thanksgiving meal, and I don't want to take any more of those carbohydrates in. I don't want to, the gravies and all that stuff. Cognitively, I don't want to do that. My hunger is telling me I want to do that. So at the end of that meal, I say I'm going to only have one serving, but in addition to putting it off and allowing my homeostasis to come in a little bit later and help me with that, not getting a second serving, what if I just sliver off a nice piece of apple pie? Throw that sugar into my system right at the end, and I'm satisfied. I have enough sugar in my body, and it tells my brain I've had enough to eat. And so imagine that you can say, and you can now say, I'm having dessert to lose weight. I don't know. Now, moderation, I'm not talking about half the pie. I'm talking about a little piece of a pie. It doesn't take a lot of sugar to activate this system, but something sweet. It can be natural fructose or sucrose, or it can be your favorite pastry or a donut. Doesn't really matter. That injection of sugar should kind of stop that hunger right there. And so I thought that was a curious speculation to think about why dessert might be there in the first place. And either way, whether that's the history of dessert at the end of the meal doesn't really matter. It is a tool that you can use to limit the amount of servings that you have at Thanksgiving, and thus, in my opinion, have more leftovers for the rest of the week so that you can eat turkey for weeks at a time. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the notion of, and related to this, is the notion of why do I get tired at the end of my Thanksgiving meal? Everybody seems, after all that. So let's take a look at this. Here's the turkey that we have. Now, the common reason why we think we get tired is that in turkey, there is a fairly large amount of the amino acid called L-tryptophan, or just refer to it as tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is an amino acid that when we metabolize it, it goes into the brain and it produces serotonin. And serotonin is a nice That's the feel-good drug. It's a feel-good, I feel relaxed. We need serotonin to activate melatonin in our own brain, and that's a whole other video. And just that's where we relax and we feel tired. However, there's a problem with that. From what we know about tryptophan being metabolized into serotonin is that happens when tryptophan is taken alone and not in the presence of other amino acids. There are, however, tons of other amino acids in turkey. So in fact, tryptophan is not being converted into serotonin, and so tryptophan is sadly not the reason why we get tired at the end of our Thanksgiving meal. The fact is, we're going to go back to that. If I went back to that original graphic and we talked about those things that happen right at the beginning of the meal. Now, we're highly motivated at the beginning of the meal because we have a lot of hunger going on, a lot of hunger drive happening. But as we're eating, our stomach is becoming distended. Not only is the stomach being distended, but there's an increased blood flow to the stomach in order to start doing what the stomach does. And that blood flow, we only have so much blood, has to come from somewhere. It comes from the rest of the body. And there's actually a decrease in the blood flow to the brain. And that is why you get tired. It has nothing to do with tryptophan or serotonin. It's your stomach distending and your body saying, yep, we got a thing going on here in the stomach, and we need to send the blood down there to do its thing. It is the same process when we drink milk. Let's say you drink warm milk or something at night. It's not the milk. It's not a release of tryptophan, serotonin. It's the distending of the stomach. When you drink milk and it goes into the stomach acids, it curdles. It sounds a little gross, but that's actually what happens. And it fills the stomach. So you feel that full feeling. And that, with the blood flow going there, the blood flow leaves your brain, goes to your stomach. So, that's what we were going to talk about today. So we've talked a little bit about the mysteries of eating and why we're hungry and what we can do to maybe have satiation a little bit earlier in turkey dinner and have more leftovers. And we've answered this question about why do we get so tired. And that is Psychobabble for Thanksgiving. So have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you on the next video.